He stood at the entrance of the Galactic Academy, her heart beating fast as she looked up at the massive floating buildings. The crystal towers seemed to dance in the light of three suns, their surfaces changing colors like soap bubbles in the wind. She clutched her acceptance letter tightly, still finding it hard to believe she was the first human ever to be accepted here. "Move aside, Earth creature," a tall, blue-skinned student pushed past her. His 6 eyes didn't even look at her as he walked by. He took a deep breath and reminded herself that she had earned her place here. Her test scores were perfect. That's why they had to accept her, even though many didn't want a human at the academy. The entry hall was filled with students from 100 different worlds. Some floated in the air, others crawled on many legs, and a few were just balls of light. He felt very small in her simple white uniform. At least she had managed to tie her long black hair neatly, trying to look as professional as possible on her first day. "All new students, please proceed to the Great Hall for orientation," a voice echoed in her head. He looked around, confused. The other students were already moving, so she followed them. She noticed some of them pointing at her and whispering. The Great Hall took her breath away. It wasn't a room. It was like being in space itself. Stars and galaxies swirled overhead, and the floor was clear, showing the planet far below. He felt dizzy for a moment, but forced herself to keep walking. "Welcome, new students." Dean Nexer appeared in the center of the hall. He was tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished silver. "You represent the finest young minds in the galaxy. Each of you has proven yourself worthy of studying at the most prestigious academy in known space." His eyes stopped on He for a moment longer than the others. Even those from less advanced worlds have shown surprising potential. Some students laughed. He kept her face calm, but her hands tightened into fists at her sides. She had known it wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't expected the dean himself to make fun of her. "Your room assignments are being sent to your neural implants now," Dean Nexer continued. He raised her hand. The dean looked annoyed. "Yes. I don't have a neural implant, sir. Humans don't use them." Her voice came out stronger than she expected. More laughter. The dean's silver face showed no expression. "How primitive. You will find your assignment on this." He waved his hand, and a small crystal appeared floating in front of her. "Try not to break it." He took the crystal, ignoring the snickers around her. The surface lit up, showing her room number. Level 42, Section 7, Room 15. As the other students filed out, following glowing lines that only they could see through their implants, He looked at her crystal map. She had studied the academy's layout for weeks before coming here. She knew where to go, even without fancy neural technology. A small floating robot approached her. "Do you require assistance finding your quarters?" it asked in a friendly voice. "No, thank you," He said firmly. "I can find my own way." She walked out of the Great Hall with her head held high. Let them laugh. Let them think humans were primitive. She had a feeling they would learn differently soon enough. As she walked, she didn't notice Dean Nexer watching her with an unusual gleam in his metallic eyes, or the way he touched a very old ring on his finger that seemed to glow faintly as she passed by. He placed both hands on the crystal pillar. The blue light spread up her arms, making her glow like a star. "What are you doing?" Dean Nexer shouted. "Stop her." But his guards couldn't move. The power He held was far older and stronger than their weapons. "I understand now," He said softly. "The knowledge isn't meant to be hidden or controlled. It's meant to be shared, but in the right way, at the right time." The crystal pillar pulsed with light. Images filled the air around them, not just of power and war this time, but of learning, growth, and peace. The architects didn't just build weapons, He said. They built schools, libraries, places of healing. She looked at Dean Nexer. That's what this academy really was. A place of learning, not just power. Professor Jinwoo stepped forward, his ring glowing bright blue now. The Guardians will help, he said. We've watched and waited for so long. Now we can teach. You'll ruin everything. Dean Nexer tried to raise his weapon, but with a wave of her hand, Ho-Jin turned it to dust. No, she said. We'll fix everything. The right way this time. She closed her eyes and reached into the crystal's memories. Knowledge flowed through her like a river, but this time she wasn't overwhelmed. She understood what needed to be done. Golden light spread from the pillar, flowing through the academy's walls. Where it touched, old systems woke up. Hidden doors opened. Ancient learning halls came to life. The whole academy. Du Young whispered in awe. It's transforming. Back to what it was meant to be. He-Jin said. A bridge between what humanity was and what it can become. Dean Nexer fell to his knees as the light passed through him. His ring crumbled to ash. My employers, they'll come. Let them come, Professor Jinwoo said. They'll find something different than what they expected. Not a weapon to control, but a school to learn from. He-Jin turned to her friends. Will you help? There's so much to teach, to learn. Of course, Du Young said immediately. Tail stepped forward. My people helped cause the great forgetting. Now I want to help with the great remembering. The right way this time. The light faded, but the academy was changed. The walls glowed with soft colors. New rooms had appeared, filled with gentle light and ancient wisdom waiting to be discovered. What now? Du Young asked. Now, He-Jin smiled. We begin. Slowly, carefully. We'll teach others what humanity once was, but more importantly, what humanity can be. She looked at Professor Jinwoo. The Guardians won't have to hide anymore. They can help guide us. And the Seekers? Tal asked. They'll learn that power isn't something you can take or control. He-Jin said. It's something you earn through wisdom, patience, and understanding. As they talked, more students and teachers came into the chamber, drawn by the changes in the academy. They looked around in wonder at the ancient technology now awake and alive. Welcome, He-Jin said to them, to the new Galactic Academy, where all species can learn from humanity's past, both its triumphs and its mistakes, where we'll remember not just what we were, but choose what we want to become. Professor Jinwoo smiled. A new chapter begins, he said. No, He-Jin corrected him gently. An old story continues, but this time, we'll write it together, and we'll write it better. Outside the academy's windows, the sun was rising. The light touched the changed buildings, making them shine like beacons in the morning sky. A new day was beginning, not just for He-Jin or the academy, but for all humanity. He-Jin stood between Dean Nexer and the crystal pillar. More memories were flooding into her mind. Memories of power, of glory, and of terrible mistakes. Step aside, girl, Dean Nexer said. You've done your part. Now let those who understand power use it properly. You want to control humans, He-Jin said, to make them into weapons, to make them what they were meant to be. Dean Nexer's voice rose. Look at your species now, crawling on one tiny planet, while they should be ruling the stars. He-Jin felt the knowledge of the architects burning in her mind. She could see how to build ships that could cross galaxies in moments, how to make stars dance like fireflies, how to bend space itself. The power was amazing and terrifying. He-Jin, Professor Jinwoo said softly, you understand now, don't you? Why they chose to forget. She nodded slowly. In her memories, she saw the wars. Whole solar systems destroyed in anger. Billions of lives lost because of pride. The architects had been too powerful, too sure of themselves. The choice must be made again, Professor Jinwoo said. Dean Nexer laughed. Choice? There is no choice. Take her. The guards moved forward. He-Jin raised her hands, and suddenly she knew exactly what to do. Lines of force appeared around her, just like in the training room. But this time, she understood them perfectly. Stop, she commanded. The guards froze in mid-step, caught in her web of power. Magnificent, Dean Nexer said. You see, this is what humans should be. No, Hejin said quietly. This is what we were, and why we had to change. She turned to her friends. Du Young's silver face showed worry. Tail looked afraid, but he stood his ground. They were ready to fight with her, whatever she chose. The architects weren't gods. Hejin said. They were people. People with too much power and too little wisdom. They fought wars that almost broke the universe. And then they understood. Power isn't a right. It's a responsibility. Pretty words, Dean Nexer sneered. But they mean nothing. The power exists. It must be used. You're wrong. Hejin touched the crystal pillar. The power exists, but it must be earned. Slowly, carefully. She smiled at Professor Jinwoo. That's why they chose to forget. To start over. To learn wisdom before power. Then what will you do? Dean Nexar asked. Make everyone forget again. No, Hejin said. The old way didn't work perfectly. Some humans are remembering now. But we can't let people like you control this knowledge. She looked at her friends. We need a new way. Professor Jinwoo's eyes widened. You want to tell the truth, Hejin said. To let humans know what they once were, but also why they chose to change. To let them learn about their power slowly, guided by wisdom rather than greed. They'll never allow it, Dean Nexer shouted. My employers. Your employers are afraid, Hejin said. They're afraid of humans remembering on their own, choosing their own path. That's why they wanted to control it. She straightened her shoulders. But they can't control what's already begun. The crystal pillar glowed brighter at her words. Hejin felt the full weight of her choice. She could feel the universe holding its breath, waiting to see what humans would become this time. I know what I have to do, she said softly. They ran through old tunnels deep inside the academy. Hejin led the way, following maps that seemed to appear in her mind. Every turn felt familiar, like she had walked these paths 1,000 times before. Stop, Professor Jinwoo said suddenly. He pulled them into a small room just as heavy footsteps passed by in the main tunnel. That was close, Du Young whispered. His silver body had changed color to match the dark walls. Professor, Hejin said quietly. You know so much about all this. Who are you really? Professor Jinwoo touched his glowing ring. I am a guardian. We are the ones who chose to remember, so we could protect those who chose to forget. You mean? Hejin's eyes went wide. You're human. I was once, he smiled sadly. Very long ago. The guardians found ways to change ourselves, to live longer, to watch over Earth and the other human colonies. He looked at his slightly glowing skin. We had to hide what we were, of course. But why didn't you tell me earlier? Hejin asked. We can only guide, never force. He showed her his ring more closely. These rings help us find humans who are starting to remember. When I saw you solve that quantum problem in class, my ring glowed brighter than it had in centuries. Tull, who had been watching the tunnel, turned to them. Someone's coming. They heard voices getting closer. Hejin recognized Dean Nexer's voice among them. The human girl is the key, he was saying. Once we unlock her full memories, we can do the same to others. An army of architects, under our control. Through here, Hejin whispered. She pressed her hand against a wall, and a hidden door appeared. She didn't question how she knew it was there. They slipped through into a huge round chamber. Old machines lined the walls, covered in dust. In the center stood a tall pillar of crystal that glowed with soft blue light. The heart, Professor Jinwoo said with awe. I never knew it was still here. Hejin walked toward the crystal pillar. Inside it, she could see patterns of light moving like stars. What is it? Du Young asked. A storage device. Hejin said, memories flowing into her mind. From before the great forgetting. It holds everything. All our knowledge, our history, our mistakes. She touched the crystal, and the truth about why we chose to forget. The crystal lit up at her touch. Images appeared in the air around them. Great ships sailing between stars, cities that floated in space, and terrible weapons that could destroy worlds. Such power, Tal whispered. Too much power, Hejin said. She could feel the memories becoming clearer now. We weren't ready for it. We were like children playing with fire, but the fire could burn whole galaxies. Suddenly, the door they had come through exploded. Dean Nexar walked in with his guards, their weapons raised. How wonderful, he said, smiling. You've led us right to it, the greatest treasure of the architects. You don't understand. Professor Jinwoo stepped forward. The knowledge was hidden for a reason. The time for hiding is over, Dean Nexar said. His ring was glowing blood-red now. The girl remembers. Soon, all humans will remember. And this time, his smile grew cruel. This time, we'll make sure they use their power the right way. Our way. Hejin looked at the crystal pillar, then at her friends. She could feel more memories coming. And with them, a decision she knew she would have to make. Du Young led them through narrow maintenance tunnels that ran between the academy's walls. Hejin's head was still spinning with strange memories, but she forced herself to focus on running. In here, Du Young said, pointing to a small door. They squeezed through into a round room full of old machines. What is this place? Tal asked, looking around nervously. An old control room, Professor Jinwoo said. From when the academy was first built. He touched a wall and soft lights came on. We should be safe here for a while. Jin sat down, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Why did Dean Nexar call me an architect? And who are his employers? Professor Jinwoo's face grew dark. There are people, powerful people, who have been searching for humans who can remember. They call themselves the Seekers. They believe if they can wake up the old knowledge in enough humans, they can bring back the architect's power. But isn't that a good thing? Hejin asked. If humans were once so advanced. No, Tal said suddenly. Everyone looked at him. His blue skin had turned almost white. It would be terrible. He took a deep breath. I need to tell you something. About my people. The Luminarians, Professor Jinwoo nodded. Tell her. My people. Tal looked ashamed. We were the ones who helped make humans forget. We created the great forgetting. Our ancestors thought the architects were too powerful, too dangerous. So they made a weapon. A wave of energy that wiped away all memory of what humans really were. Jin stared at him. Your people did this to us. Yes, Tal said quietly. But we didn't know the whole truth. The architects, your people, they agreed to it. What? Hejin and Du Young said together. Professor Jinwoo nodded. The architects saw what their power was doing to the galaxy. Some wanted to rule everything. Others wanted to destroy those who opposed them. There were wars that almost tore space itself apart. He looked at Hejin. So they chose to forget. To become simple humans who would have to learn everything again. But this time more slowly, more wisely. Hejin's head hurt as more memories flashed through her mind. Memories that felt millions of years old. But now it's coming back. The knowledge, the power. Because the Seekers have been experimenting on humans for years, Professor Jinwoo said. Testing them. Trying to wake up the old memories. Most experiments failed. But you, Hejin, you're different. The memories are coming back naturally. That's why they let her into the academy, Du Young said, understanding. They wanted to watch her. Suddenly, alarms started blaring. Red lights flashed in the old control room. They're scanning the maintenance tunnels, Professor Jinwoo said. We need to move. Wait, Hejin said. She walked to an old screen on the wall. Her hands moved by themselves again, touching it in a strange pattern. The screen lit up, showing maps of the academy she had never seen before. How did you do that? Tal asked. Because humans built this place, Ho Jin said, the knowledge coming to her like a half-remembered dream. The academy, it was an architect station once. Professor Jinwoo smiled sadly. And now you know why the Seekers want it so badly. The academy holds more secrets than anyone knows. Secrets they think you can help them find. The alarms grew louder. On the screen, He-jin could see black dots moving through the tunnels toward them. We need to get to the heart of the station, she said, not knowing how she knew this. There's something there. Something important. Then that's where we'll go, Du-young said firmly. Together, Professor Jinwoo led He-jin, Du-young, and Tal through dark hallways. The whole academy was shaking now. Red lights flashed everywhere. Where are we going? He-jin asked. The zero-gravity training chamber, Professor Jinwoo said. It's the safest place right now. The walls are made of quantum-locked metal. They can't scan through them. They reached the large round room used for space training. Usually, it was full of students learning to move in zero gravity. Now it was empty and dark. Who's after us? Tal asked. He looked nervous, his blue skin glowing brighter than usual. Those who never believed the architects were gone, Professor Jinwoo said. He pressed his hand to a panel, and the gravity turned off. They all floated up. They'd been searching for signs of returning knowledge. He-jin's test results today told them what they wanted to know. He-jin tried to stay calm as she floated. But I'm just a normal human. I'm not special. You are far from normal, Professor Jinwoo said. The old knowledge is waking up in you. That makes you very special, and very dangerous to some people. Suddenly, the door burst open. Dean Nexer floated in with 4 tall figures in black armor. Their helmets had no faces, just smooth black metal. How kind of you to gather them all in one place, Dean Nexer said. His silver skin sparkled in the dim light. The human, especially. My employers have waited a long time to meet one like her. She's just a student. Professor Jinwoo moved in front of He-jin. She's an architect, Dean Nexer said. Or she will be, once we help her remember everything. He smiled. Don't worry, it won't hurt much. The armored figures raised their weapons. He-jin felt something strange happening in her mind. The room seemed to blur. She could suddenly see lines of force running through everything. Gravity, light, even time itself. Without thinking, she reached out and grabbed one of those lines. The room exploded with light. The armored figures flew backward like they were hit by a wave. Dean Nexer's eyes went wide. Impossible, he whispered. She shouldn't be able to do that without training. He-jin didn't understand what she was doing, but her body seemed to know. She moved her hands in strange patterns. The air itself bent around them, creating a shield of bent light and gravity. He-jin, Professor Jinwoo's voice was full of awe. You're space weaving. That's an architect technique that's been lost for 10,000 years. Dean Nexer shouted something in a language He-jin didn't know. The armored figures shot beams of red light at them. But He-jin could see the energy coming. She twisted her hands again, and the beams curved away like water around a rock. We need to go. Professor Jinwoo grabbed her arm. You're remembering too fast. It's not safe. He-jin nodded. Her head hurt, and strange images kept flashing through her mind. Huge ships, impossible cities, stars being moved like chess pieces. The maintenance tunnels, Du-young said. I can lead us there. They flew through the zero-gravity room toward another door. He-jin kept the shield up behind them. She looked back once and saw Dean Nexer touching his ring, speaking urgently into it. Don't fight it, Professor Jinwoo told her as they escaped. Let the memories come. You're not just remembering who the architects were. He-jin, you're remembering who you are. The academy library was different at night. The huge room glowed softly with millions of data crystals, each containing thousands of books. He-jin met Du-young in a quiet corner far from the main entrance. Look at this, Du Young whispered. He held up an old crystal that was darker than the others. I found it in the restricted section. How did you get in there? He Jin asked. I can change my shape, remember? Du Young smiled. I slipped under the door. But that's not important. Watch this. He placed the crystal in a reader. Ancient text appeared in the air above it. The letters kept changing shape, like they couldn't decide what language to be. This is from the early times, Du Young said. Before the current galactic civilization, most records from then were lost or destroyed. But this one survived. He Jin leaned closer. Suddenly, the changing letters settled into clear words she could read. Du Young gasped. You can read that? He asked. Even our best computers can't translate this language. It's talking about the architects, He Jin said, her voice shaking a little. It says they were the first great civilization. They built impossible things. They could shape space itself. She paused. Du Young, it says they looked exactly like humans. A noise made them both jump. They turned to see Tal stepping out from behind a bookshelf. I knew you were up to something, he said. But he didn't sound angry. He looked scared. Tal, please don't tell anyone, He Jin started to say. Tell them what? That you can read the language of the architects. That you fixed that quantum engine using their ancient methods. Tal walked closer. My people have stories about the architects. They say the architects didn't die out. They say they chose to forget, to become less than they were. Why would they do that? He Jin asked. Because they were too powerful, a new voice said. They all turned to see Professor Jin Woo standing there. And power always attracts those who would misuse it. He Jin thought he would be angry, but he just looked sad. He walked over and looked at the ancient text. So you can read it, he said to He Jin. The old language is waking up in you, just like the old knowledge. He pulled something from his pocket. It was a small metal disc that glowed like his ring. Do you know what this is? He Jin reached for it without thinking. The moment her fingers touched it, symbols appeared above it. Symbols she somehow knew were numbers. Coordinates, she said, not knowing how she knew. Star maps. But they're wrong. The stars aren't in these positions anymore. They were once, Professor Jin Woo said quietly, a very long time ago. Who are you really? Du Young asked him. A watcher, Professor Jin Woo said. We've waited a long time for the old knowledge to return. He looked at He Jin. But now I fear we may have waited too long. Dean Nexer knows what you are, and he will not be the only one interested in a human who can remember. Remember what? He Jin asked. Everything, Professor Jin Woo said. The knowledge of the most powerful civilization that ever existed. Your civilization, He Jin, the one that chose to forget. Thunder rumbled outside the library windows, but He Jin knew it wasn't thunder. Something was happening in the sky above the academy, something that made the data crystals flicker and dim. They're coming, Professor Jin Woo said. We need to move. Now, 1 month into her studies at the Galactic Academy, He Jin faced her first big test. The practical examination in quantum mechanics was held in the simulation chamber, a massive room that could create solid holograms. Remember, Professor Jin Woo told the class, you must repair a broken quantum engine. The simulation will be real. One wrong move, and you'll feel real pain. He Jin stood with the other students on floating platforms. Du Young gave her an encouraging nod from his platform. Tal, on another platform, smirked at her. Begin, Professor Jin Woo said. The air shimmered, and a huge quantum engine appeared in front of each student. He Jin's heart beat faster. The engine was nothing like the simple ones on Earth. It had parts that moved in ways that hurt her eyes to look at. She heard other students already starting their work, their neural implants helping them scan the engines. He Jin had to rely on her eyes and mind alone. She looked at the broken engine carefully. Suddenly, her head felt strange. The engine in front of her seemed to blur, and for a moment, she saw a different one. Older, but somehow more advanced. Her hands started moving on their own, like they remembered doing this many times before. "What is she doing?" she heard Tal say. "That's not the right way." He-Jin barely heard him. She was lost in the work, her fingers moving to places that seemed to call to them. Parts of the engine that weren't supposed to fit together clicked into place perfectly. She wasn't thinking anymore. She was remembering. "Impossible," someone whispered. The engine in front of her hummed to life. Blue light flowed through it in beautiful patterns. He-Jin stepped back, suddenly aware of what she had done. She looked around. Everyone was staring at her. Even Professor Jinwoo looked shocked. "How did you do that?" Professor Jinwoo asked quietly. "That repair method, it's not in any of our books." I don't know," He-Jin said honestly. "It just felt right." "You cheated somehow," Tal said, but his voice shook. His engine was still in pieces. "No," Professor Jinwoo said. "She didn't cheat. That engine design, it's working better than the original." He touched something in his pocket, and He-Jin saw that same strange glow again. Do-Young floated his platform next to hers. "He-Jin, your engine's power output is 30% higher than the standard design. How is that possible?" Before she could answer, Dean Nexar walked into the chamber. He looked at He-Jin's engine, then at her. The ring on his finger glowed brightly now. "Professor Jinwoo," he said, "please send the data from this test to my office." He turned to He-Jin. "Most interesting, young human. Most interesting indeed." After the test, He-Jin walked back to her room with Do-Young. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Are you okay?" Do-Young asked. "I don't understand what happened," He-Jin said. "When I looked at the engine, it was like I was remembering something. But how can I remember something I never learned?" Do-Young was quiet for a moment. "Maybe," he said carefully, "you did learn it. Just not in this lifetime." He-Jin stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "Meet me in the library tonight," Do-Young said. "I think it's time we did some research about your species. The real research, not what they teach us in history class." As they parted ways, He-Jin felt a chill. What was happening to her? And why did she have a feeling that the answers might be both wonderful and terrifying? He-Jin's first class was Advanced Quantum Engineering. She found the classroom easily enough, but when she walked in, all the seats seemed to move away from her. The chairs were alive, she realized. They were sensing their owner's wishes to stay far from the human. "How interesting," a soft voice said beside her. "They're being quite childish, aren't they?" He-Jin turned to see a student with skin that looked like flowing mercury. His shape kept changing slightly, like water in zero gravity. "I'm Do-Young," he said. "I'm an artificial being. My people were created by the founders thousands of years ago." He smiled, or at least his face made a pattern that looked like a smile. "Would you like to sit with me?" Before He-Jin could answer, another voice cut in. "Do-Young, you shouldn't waste your time." A tall student with glowing blue skin walked up to them. "I'm Tal. I've studied your species, human. Your technology is barely past burning rocks for heat." "We have quantum computers," He-Jin said calmly. "Primitive ones," Tal laughed. "You can't even process fourth-dimensional calculations. How do you expect to keep up in this class?" "The same way I got perfect scores on the entrance exams," He-Jin replied. Several students who were listening went quiet. "Those tests were simplified for your species," Tal said, but he looked less sure now. "No, they weren't," Do-Young spoke up. "I checked. She took the same tests we all did." Just then, Professor Jinwoo walked in. He was surprisingly human-looking, except for his silver eyes and the faint blue glow under his skin. Everyone quickly found their seats. He-Jin sat next to Do-Young, grateful for his kindness. "Today," Professor Jinwoo said, "we will examine quantum entanglement at the galactic scale. Please activate your neural interfaces to download the problem set." He-Jin raised her hand. The professor nodded at her, and unlike Dean Nexer, he didn't seem annoyed. "I'll need the problems in visual form, sir." "Of course." Professor Jin-Woo waved his hand, and a hologram appeared in front of He-Jin. She heard Tal snicker behind her. The problem showed two galaxies, their quantum states interlinked in complex patterns. They had to calculate how to transmit data between them instantly. He-Jin looked at it carefully. Something about the pattern seemed familiar, like she had seen it before, maybe in a dream. Her hands moved quickly as she wrote out her calculations on the hologram. The professor walked around, checking everyone's work. He stopped at her desk for a long time. "Interesting approach," he said quietly. "I haven't seen this method before. It just seemed natural." He-Jin said. She didn't know how to explain that the answer had felt like remembering something rather than figuring it out. "Your solution is correct," Professor Jin-Woo announced to the class, "and quite elegant. Perhaps some of you could learn from He-Jin's unique perspective." Tail made a sound of disbelief. He-Jin caught Du-Young giving her a thumbs up. He must have learned that human gesture somewhere. After class, as He-Jin was leaving, she noticed Professor Jin-Woo watching her with an intense look. When their eyes met, he quickly turned away and touched something in his pocket. For a second, she thought she saw the same kind of glow she had noticed on Dean Nexer's ring. "That was amazing," Du-Young said as they walked out. "Would you like to study together sometime?" He-Jin smiled, her first real smile since arriving at the academy. "I'd like that," she said. But part of her mind was still thinking about that strange familiar pattern, and why solving it had felt like remembering an old song.